Welcome to Vineyard Hopkinton. As we follow Jesus together, we experience the Holy Spirit, create a multicultural community, and pursue kingdom of God justice.
So let's jump in. We are in a series in 1st and 2nd Samuel. About a year ago, I had this interesting conversation where somebody reached out and said they wanted to talk to a pastor. Every once in a while, I get to have these funny conversations with people that want to talk to a pastor that I go into completely blind, and we'll find out what that actually means by the end of it, which is kind of, usually it's fun. And so I had one of those. He reached out, and I said, sure, let's chat. He wanted to come to the church and show me something. So he ended up arriving, and he had created this thing over the course of 20 years, and he wanted to share it with a pastor. And so he wasn't a churchgoer. I don't know if he would have called himself a follower of Jesus. He didn't really differentiate that for himself. But what he ended up explaining to me was that 20 years ago, he heard God speak to him and tell him in kind of like a semi-audible voice to make this thing. And so he did. For 20 years, he created. And he dug into the Bible and learned more about who God was and kept going with it. And so he wanted to show what he had made to a pastor. And it was great. And I loved the heart and what was going on within him. But honestly, what he created, I have zero expertise in. And so I looked at him after 45 minutes and I was like, I love that you're sharing this with me. Thank you. I feel honored. I have no idea how to help you. And I just said it honestly because I was like, I don't really know how to help you with the next steps. And I think that's what you're looking for. And he looked at me and he was like, oh, you already did. I was like, okay. He said, what I kind of really wanted was to come here and to say out loud that God had spoken to me and not to be told that I was crazy. He's like, you sat there and you just took it like it was normal everyday activities. And then I smiled and I was like, oh, if that's what you're coming for, great, we're at the right spot. And I was like, well, our church believes that God does speak. And I think that the best way you can respond to God speaking is to act on what it is that he's saying to you. I think you did it pretty darn well. I long to hear God speak as clear as he did to that guy. I mean, it was like the dude was clear that God had spoken to him. There was no question for him. And I think that most humans long to hear God speak to them that clearly. I think that most humans long to be invited into something that feels bigger than them. I think that most humans long to hear someone who they respect and who's kind of greater than them say clearly without conditions that they love them. I think that most humans, deep down maybe really deep down, really long to hear God speak because then that would prove that he's actually real. And that would be really nice proof, right? And I think that for most of us, we long for this because there's a belief that it could actually happen, even if we're a little scared to say that out loud. We're in the beginnings of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and in chapter 3, where we're at this morning, this is how it starts. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli, and in those days the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place, and the lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark was. So let me lay out this scene for us, because I think most of us probably have a picture of what this actually looks like that may be a little different than what's going on here. So the space, it says Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, or in some translations, I think it says the temple. So if you have this picture of the temple like from Jesus' time, toss it out, okay? If you have a picture of the temple from like Solomon's time, toss it out. What we have here is a semi-permanent tent. It's like a big tent circle with tents surrounding the big tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. That's what's going on. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is. So when it says that Samuel was lying down by the Ark, most likely what that actually means is he was sleeping in his semi-permanent tent room because Eli and the other priests and Samuel, as somebody who lived on the grounds, would live in tents around the center of the Ark of the Covenant. So he's like a 3-minute walk away from the like manifest presence of God. That's some pretty powerful stuff, right? Like that's pretty close. Closer than any of us sleep to the Ark of the Covenant, certainly, right? But it's definitely not like Indiana Jones hugging the Ark so that nobody steals it from him, so the Germans don't come and take it. Like, it's different picture than you may be going at from that angle. There's two people in this story. There's Eli, who's the high priest, and then there's Samuel, who's a preteen boy who serves in the temple because his parents dedicated him as a toddler to service of God. Sarah talked about that wonderfully last week. I'm not giving that backstory because it's big, but listen to last week's and you will know a little bit more about what was going on with his parents. But Josephus, he was a first century Jewish historian. He said Samuel was about 11 years old when this story was going on. So the people, the place, and then here's the problem. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. You know, Eli was not just the high priest, but we're told in Samuel that he was also the judge. He's the leader of all of Israel. If any singular person in Jewish culture was going to hear God speak in their time, it was Eli. That's kind of his job as the high priest. So if hearing God speak is rare, that means Eli has not heard God speak, probably in a very, very long time. So here we are within this tent city temple with a high priest who hasn't heard God, a preteen boy, and surprise, God's going to speak. Verse 4. Then the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli, and he said, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli said, "I didn't call you. Go back to bed." So he went and he laid down. And again the Lord called, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and he went to Eli. "Here I am. You called me again." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call you. Go back to bed and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and he went to Eli. And you can bet there was probably a little angst. "Here I am, you called me." And Eli realized that the Lord was calling to the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. There's 3 elements to hearing God that they tell us about in this story. There's listening, there's knowing, and then there's obeying. Listen, know, and obey. The 11-year-old Samuel seems like the world's most dutiful 11-year-old. We have an 11-year-old in our house. If I called to her in the middle of the night, she would never hear me unless she was already awake. You know, like she would still continue to sleep because that's what 11-year-olds do. You know, they keep sleeping. So the world's most dutiful 11-year-old is somehow on an awareness level beyond most, where he hears somebody calling and he wakes up because he knows that almost blind Eli probably needs help getting to the restroom and back. So he gets up to go do what it is that he's there to do. Only it's not Eli calling to him, because he did not yet know the Lord. He didn't know what was going on. What's interesting is that this is a kid who sleeps a 3-minute walk away from the Ark of the Covenant, who sees sacrifices offered all day long, I would assume, who watches the priest probably pray off and on multiple times throughout the day, again, if they're doing their job as priests, that's kind of what their job was, and yet he still didn't know God. What's that inferring? What's going on here? See, knowing in the Old Testament implies deeply recognizing somebody else. So it's like recognizing somebody from across the room, hidden in the shadow, and being like, hey, Mark, how's it going? You could just tell that they're there. Or seeing your friend walk into the room and your back's turned to them and you're like, oh, I still know that Marcos is over there because he's making faces at me, because you deeply know them. Or it means for an animal to know their master's voice, especially when they're in danger, and know that it's time to come. My dog does not always have that skill. Maybe my dog and Samuel should talk. Samuel didn't know God in that way yet. He had to be told that it was God before he could recognize God's voice. And friends, that's like obvious to me in some ways. If you don't know my voice and I say Bonnie, you're going to be like, who's talking to me if you're not facing me? But if you know my voice, it's going to be really obvious. But somebody has to tell you that that's Stephen that's calling for you. If Samuel doesn't know what God's voice sounds like, how's he going to know that it's God? He needs somebody to introduce him. And that's what Eli does. Eli introduces Samuel to God's voice. Eli, the guy who doesn't hear God's voice very often, maybe not in like decades by this point, still knows just enough to know, wait, that's God and you should talk to him. Friends, I just want to encourage us that I think, there's a lot of Eli's life that we're going to read in this sermon series, and it's not all good. But in this one instance, he does like the best thing that you and I can do as followers of Jesus. I think helping somebody else to recognize the voice of God is greater than any magical prophetic word you could ever give. If you can help somebody else to be able to know God's voice for themselves, that's like the greatest gift that you could ever give to somebody else. Be people who share that gift with those around us. Help others to recognize his voice so that they can follow him well. You're going to see what that's going to do for Samuel. It completely changes the trajectory of everything. A few years ago in youth group, Sarah was doing this for the youth group, and I was like the extra adult in the room. Not really I think it was like numerically I was required. I wasn't actually even helpful. But, I was there hanging out. It was good. And Sarah did a prayer exercise where we were listening for God's voice. And so we split up and we had paper, and I remember like everybody was just jotting down stuff. And I went off, and I don't know if you guys have ever done this sort of a thing, but what I usually do is I usually hear something and then I think that it's not actually God, so I don't actually acknowledge it. And then I keep listening and I'm a little frustrated, like, okay, God, why aren't you speaking? And he probably did at the beginning. I just said that it wasn't him. And, and I go through this like back and forth thing. So I think I finally had like one thing that I wrote down that I was like, this is God. I'm a pastor. I can do this. So we circle back up, and I'm looking around because I'm a pastor and I can cheat. So I'm looking at everybody's paper. And these teens had filled their entire paper with things. And then they started to share, and they had stuff for themselves, and they had stuff for other people, and they had pictures, and they had verses, and I was like, really? Like, it was amazing, the clarity. And it was because they had been introduced to God's voice, they heard him, and then they just said, okay, that's got to be him. They knew who he was. Meanwhile, I'm struggling over there to acknowledge if it is. And I just want to say to the teenagers, the early 20s in the room, like, share what it is that God's saying to you, because I think you probably hear him clearer than a lot of the rest of us. And it's a huge gift. We need to hear what God's speaking to your heart. If you're new to following Jesus, I bet you're going to hear him clearer than I am. Share it. Because I got my crusty filters. You don't. That's a beautiful gift. Speak what it is that God's saying to your heart. And if you're like me and you're a little crusty and you need to clean your filter, friends, it's worth it. Do it. You want to hear him speak your name. You want to hear him call out to you. Listen to the one you know. That's what Samuel's learning here. And now that he knows what God's voice sounds like, he knows what to do. So Samuel went and he lay down in his place. And the Lord came and he stood there, calling as at other times. Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. You know, this is what happens when we place ourselves correctly. God begins to speak. I want to invite Gina Prano up. She's going to share a story of hearing God speak. As Gina's coming up, I just want to highlight the fact that all that Samuel did to hear God, what did he do? He went and lied down in bed. I think hearing God speak is a lot easier than we make it out to be sometimes. But Gina, take it.
Hi, guys. So, many of you know, back in 1998, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. And there were lots of people praying for him in our church. So many people were praying around the world that I had known and made connections with in worship. And but then there was one Sunday when a guy walked in, and he came right up to me. He was a complete stranger. And he said, I'm from Georgia, and I'm from a church of 10,000 intercessors, and we're praying for your husband. And I said to myself, yes, right? This is going to happen. And so I went away from that. That was my take home. But 2 years later, my husband died. And I felt very like God, like he messed with me or something. And I held it against him, I guess, for a while. So forward 25 years later, maybe 24 it was, sometimes I hear God in complete sentences. And this one was unmistakable to me. I was walking out on my deck, and I heard the Lord say, you know that guy? And I knew exactly what guy he was talking about. He said, I sent him so that you would know that Phil didn't die from lack of prayer. Because during the time, I myself could not pray. I was so freaked out, I could not pray. And when God spoke that to me, I knew that it was him, because I felt a peace about that I didn't even know I needed. So that's the goodness of God, and sometimes what he speaks.
That's amazing. Thank you, Gina. That's really good. What does it look like to listen well to the voice that we know? I guess for Gina, it was just listening at all the times and then acknowledging like, okay, God, that's you, even in the midst of the pain, which is a gift, but it's a hard gift. Here's what it looked like for Samuel. And the Lord said to Samuel, see, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. I think that's funny. At that time, I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family. For I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about, that his sons blasphemed against God, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore, I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. So Samuel lay down until morning and then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And he was afraid to tell the vision. But Eli called him and said, Samuel, my son. And Samuel answered, here I am. What was it that he said to you? Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything that he told you. So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing. Then Eli said, he is the Lord. Let him do what's good in his eyes. And the Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. I mean, it's no wonder that the 11-year-old was super nervous to say this to the high priest, right? You're going to die and all your family's going to be destroyed. That's a really rough word. But to his credit, again, Eli knew that Samuel needed to be honest, and he needed to obey what it was that God had spoken to him. And that obedience led to a lifetime of hearing God speak for Samuel. You know, I heard a story about an older man who was really fed up with his pastor sharing what he felt like God was speaking to him. And so he told him about it. And he went up to the pastor after church, and he kind of got in his face, and he was like, I'm tired of you saying all these things, and then nothing's ever happening. He's like, you told me that I was going to go to Africa. And the pastor put his head down a little awkwardly and said softly, well, did you ever buy a ticket? You know, friends, sometimes we just need to be obedient to what God's saying. And we need to stop questioning all the other things. The best response to hearing God speak can sometimes be to just start moving. You know, a couple of years ago, I was helping a couple discern if they were going to plant a church. And so I said, well, how about if we go and prayer walk around the city center? You choose the area, it's your space, you lead and guide us. So we went, and if you would have seen us, by the way, it just looks like we were talking to each other, not like anything like weird, like air movements or something. I don't know what people always think with prayer walking, like we're like doing this when we're walking the streets. Just looked like we were talking. So we go around and we are praying over the town and just asking God to bless it, to bless the people that we see, to bless the community, to bless the businesses. And as we go around, I noticed there weren't a lot of businesses open at the time that we were walking around. And there was this cheese shop that was open. So we walked by it and I noticed it. And then we finished the loop and we kind of finished close to where that cheese shop was. And so I was like, hey, let's just stop in there. So we went in and we talked to the owners for like 20 minutes because nobody else was there. And we ended up buying some things, which is good because you don't want to just be the like weirdo Christians that also never spend any money. And so we bought stuff and like talked about their cheese and how they made it and all that stuff. And then as we were leaving, I was like, hey, I'm a pastor. Could we just pray for you? Can we just bless you before we like head out? And they were like, okay, sure. Saying nice things about us to God sounds fine. And so we did. We just paused and we just prayed for them. It was a simple like 2-minute prayer. Just asked God to bless them, to bless their business. And then we left. I don't know the long-term effect of what happened in that moment. I have no contact to them. I don't know. But I know that in that moment that there was an obvious sense of God's presence. And he kind of broke through and brought his presence into that space. And I think that our obedience to hearing God's voice, that's what it does. It brings the presence of God to the spaces that we're in. And so I want to encourage us to be people who, like Samuel, are willing to obey and to bring the presence of God to the spaces that we're in. And we would love for you to do that through prayer walking this summer in your community. You know, back on the wall, there's a little map. We'd love for you, if you go prayer walking in your town, to just throw a tack or a pin or whatever it is that's back there and mark the town that you were in and let us know that you're doing that. It could be 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be super long. But it's just space where you're saying, Jesus, I want you to actually come and to be here in this space and to come and to break through. We want to be people who are obedient to bringing the presence of God outside of this building to where he's actually placed us. And I'm actually going to do that this Wednesday in Milford. So if you want to join me and kind of see what it is, let me know after church. So 1 Samuel 3 ends this way. And all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. So Samuel listened, he knew, he obeyed, and what happened? It brought an awareness of the presence of God to the entire country. It's not going to happen every single time, guys, but it's pretty amazing what one person being willing to be obedient does when we're talking about obedience to the presence of God. What if this little crew was obedient to whatever it is that he's placing in front of us? What kind of impact would that begin to have in our area?